tell us a little bit about you, and then what you do, who you sell to, what you're selling, and maybe set that same context for if whatever stories you feel like you're going to share.
Yeah, my name is Brandon Carter. I am the Marketing Automation Director at Digital Reach. Digital Reach is a multi-channel marketing agency focusing on pretty much all things digital. And we work with 12 or 13 clients on my particular division works with 12 or 13 clients on their marketing automation. Everything from like building ABM programs in Marketo to migrating from Salesforce to HubSpot. We even work in some of the not quite as fun marketing automation platforms like Act-On and Autopilot. But yeah, basically myself and my team are just a bunch of marketing automation geeks and largely come from marketing generalist backgrounds. So we've all done things from like pay-per-click to content to
Yeah.
SEO. PR is my particular background from back in the day. Uh, yeah, so we love all things marketing and all things geekery when it comes to marketing automation. And I'm also the co-leader of the Salt Lake City HubSpot user group and have been with a guy named Darren Burnson. We've done that for about 5 years. One of the oldest and one of the first HubSpot user groups. And I'm also proud to, say that we're one of the largest in the nation, even though we haven't been meeting a ton since the pandemic hit. So yeah, I mean, my background is a lot of, like I mentioned, a lot of PR, but I've also done a lot of SEO, a lot of content. I'm a writer at heart. And that's sort of how I got into marketing automation, which has turned into like a, at this point, 7 or 8 year love affair. And it's basically what I do for 9 or 10 hours a day now and
Yeah,
love it.
yeah, that's awesome. Um, that is an interesting switch from PR to uh, automation. I don't know if a lot of people would think that that would be a path, but very few. What there is no standard path anymore. We all kind of have our own experience.
Yep.
So
And well, and part of like, I guess what I think we're going to talk about is how I made that transition. Because I think like, to me, it's a natural transition and, one that I think a lot of PR people may be finding themselves in today. I don't know.
yeah, well, let's talk about it then. Like what caused the transition. So like what made you move over, or what forced you to move over, or however it came to be.
So for years, I did PR for fairly notable brands. I spent a couple years with the Utah Jazz, basically running PR for a basketball team. Worked with a lot of prominent tech companies and startups here in the Salt Lake City and Utah County area. And in 2010, I took a job with a smaller company that didn't have the big name. We didn't have big, sexy investors like Google or any like Facebook or Google or any of these startups. The Y Combinator was not knocking on our door, and yet I was tasked with getting PR and trying to get media coverage for this organization. And after a year, like, it just wasn't happening. It's just people, the tech industry in particular, as online media was really becoming prominent in 2010. No one really wanted to write about companies that were bootstrapped, kind of boring B2B business services companies based in a you know renovated warehouse
Yeah.
in the outskirts of North Salt Lake City. And so I took my PR skills and decided that basically, if no one was going to tell our story, that we were going to do it ourselves. And we dove headfirst into content. And literally, I had very little budget. I had a blog, I had a website, a blog, and some social media profiles. And we grinded it out. And, we can go into the details, but the short story is, after a couple of years, we had a database with a couple 100,000 people and no real way of consistently reaching back out to them or marketing to them. And so that's how I sort of pivoted into uh, marketing automation. I was handed HubSpot, and suddenly I had the ability to reach out to 300,000 people at the touch of a button if I felt like it. And it's been kind of an ongoing love affair since then. But it all started with, just no, a boring, uninteresting B2B company
Yeah.
that just needed some attention. And all we did was we told our story and tried to build an audience over the course of several years. And yeah, they're still doing great. I'm no longer there, obviously, but it's still working out really well for them.
Yeah, that's cool. So I just from hearing that, there would be two, I think, things to touch on that I'd really love to hear more details on. So first, um, your your adjustment from straight PR coverage to diving into content, and maybe, and then did you say the result of that is what got you the database, or was that database kind of already there from various other uh, like campaigns and tactics?
Yeah. So the first part, generally, when you talk about PR and really PR in the traditional like media relations sense, you are developing stories and you're developing reasons why your company or your client is interesting. Why should someone else care? And in particular, like my job was to go to writers and editors and say, hey, here's why you need to cover this company. And this is, in particular, this is why your audience would find our story interesting, or we're launching this new product. Here's why you should find it interesting and why your audience will like it. Um, and if they don't, if you can't get the media to bite on that, then how else are you going to get your story out? Like you can send out press releases, but no one reads press releases.
Right.
They're like they have some value to some editors. It's a conversation starter when you're doing like media pitching, and they're good for SEO, but no like consumer or even like buyer is going to read a press release. So what I did is I pretty much translated what I would normally put in a press release. So what I would normally put in a pitch, and I put it in a blog. And we wrote it out in conversational style and tried to tell stories. Tried to be brief. One interesting tidbit is we tried it for a couple of years and had good traffic and we're getting a lot of subscribers, but I felt it could do better. So one of the things that I did is I went in, I looked at the writing level that we were putting at using the Gutenberg editor, which is a great tool that like pretty much anyone that's writing anything should be using. I plugged all of our content in kind of one at a time and found that we were writing on like a grade 13 level.
Oh man, you guys are smart.
We were we were outsmarting our audience.
Yeah, that's right.
And so what I did is from that point on, I vowed that I was only going to write at like a level between 6 and 8. And once we did that, traffic just exploded and search engines picked up on it. Our social shares picked up. So the company really does, they're an add-on for like loyalty programs. So they're pretty niche. So like what this company does is, well, like you wouldn't even know the name, because they are an add-on to when you sign up for like the Kroger, the Smiths or Kroger, like Fresh Values card or whatever that's called.
Yeah.
They're sort of like a background technology. So really niche audience, hard to find them. And so what we really needed to do is have good accessible content. But that was really like 20% of the focus. 80% was getting it out there, promoting it on social media, going into like LinkedIn groups and Facebook groups where I knew a lot of these buyers were, where I knew in particular where a lot of the influencers were, and making sure that they saw it. And all of these things sort of happen in conjunction, like good content. You could have good content, but Google may not notice it. Your audience may not notice it. You have to spend a lot of time promoting it. And as they promote it, as it gets out there, Google picks up on those social signals. They pick up on the quality. And over time, it raises up the profile of not just your blog. And this is why I'm a big believer in blogs, is as your blog rises, so does the rest of your site.
Mm-hmm.
That's what's fantastic about a blog, is you can have conversations and talk about things that you would never talk about on your core website. But as your visibility in the blog increases, it increases like your visibility for your website. Google picks up on all the other keywords. that site authority increases. So that's sort of like the story of the content, and how like I think it's a natural transition for like PR. I think PR and content should work super closely together.
Yeah.
The second part of your question,
I'm going to pause you real quick because I had
go
one
ahead.
follow-up question on that. You talked about 20% of the focus on content, and then essentially the other 80 will say on distribution.
Yep.
So what was your process for figuring out how you were going to distribute your story? Like, how did you find? I mean, you talked about finding. I think that's a lot, especially early marketers that kind of
Hmm.
like if you're in school and you're coming out and your view of marketing is probably social media, right? Like that's
Yep.
probably your little view, and that it's as simple as like setting a post. So like explain your process of really one understanding your audience and then finding the spaces that you felt like were effective in distributing the content.
Gotcha. Yeah, that's a good question. It's one, it's sort of incumbent upon anyone that's creating content to understand who it's for. Um, and those things are not, they're not going to be easy if you're operating in a silo. So if marketing is sitting in the corner just doing marketing and not working with the other teams in an organization, you're not going to know who those people are. You're just going to be sort of throwing stuff out into the wilderness. What really made the difference for me was I embedded myself with our sales team. I learned who they're talking to, both like from a title standpoint, but also from a broader standpoint. What kind of companies are they talking to? Are they like channel partners? Are they big retailers that have loyalty programs? Are they like like resellers? And once and I listened to sales calls, I listened to objections, I listened to how our salespeople talked about it. Um, Quite frankly, the best piece of content that we had uh, was a collection of stats. And I know that those are pretty common, but I found that one of our sales reps was using a really tremendously large list of statistics. And he had a few news sources that he read where he would just grab those and stick them into a PowerPoint. And it sounds terrible as a PowerPoint, but I'm looking at it thinking, man, that would be really valuable to have on a blog. So I started stealing his work and turned it into a ginormous blog post that to this day probably still ranks in the top 10 for like loyalty programs or loyalty stats, if not the number one. So the first part of it, I mean, I guess maybe the most important part of it for me is working with other parts of the organization, both sales, but also your like account managers, if you have those, your customer success team. So understand like who you're talking to. And in doing that, you can then like follow them online and see like where are they talking, where are they posting things, where are they learning? Is it LinkedIn groups? Is it just Twitter or maybe like a Twitter chat? Is it a Slack group, which is a big thing now? Like there are a lot of specialized Slack groups. So the more that you can embed yourself with the team, like your customer facing teams, and this is marketing 101 these days, right? Like you need, excuse me, you need to be aligned with your sales team. Everything else works so much better when you and sales are um, on the same wavelength, and you can understand your audience, but also like find good content talking points. Your greatest like blog post or your next ebook, your next piece of content, your next email even might be from listening to how your sales team responds to an objection. And yeah, that's just like an easy path to create good content.
Yeah. Um, yeah. So essentially, like if you were to paint it in steps, it's like you work with sales. You either listen into the conversations, join the conversation. I've heard of marketers making certain goals for themselves to actually have straight marketing to customer calls, just to
Yep.
so that like,
Yep.
sales isn't even present. So there's a little bit they can be a little more open rather than have that pressure of like they got to buy something, right? Um,
Absolutely.
and then and then, you know, like you could just tag your customer database and then either talk to them or just follow like social feeds or where they are to really get an
And
idea of what
and
they
that's kind
do.
of to sort of like answer the second part of your question, which I'm sorry, I think I neglected, but
No, yeah, let's go.
you have to put in the grit. You have to put in the homework. You have to take an interest in what you're doing and subscribe to like people, influencers, newsletters, uh, people that are in the industry that your customers are listening to, because it may not be you.
Yeah,
When you're promoting it, when you have a piece of content and you want to take it out and share it with those audiences, you cannot. You have to act like part of that community. You have to know that community because they'll communities in general will recognize someone that's got bad intentions or just wants to like sell stuff,
yep,
and your message will fall flat. If you can become part of that community, and this is where like 80% of your content promotion, this is why you spend 80% of it, because fabulous content that you spend most of your time on isn't going to do anything in the wild. But if you can go into like a Reddit group or a Slack channel and you're a known part of that community and you participate, they'll listen when you actually have something to promote.
yep.
But it all comes back to like just taking the time and putting in the effort to understand and comprehend who you're talking to and what they're interested in, what they care about.
Yeah, I think that's the cost that, at least in our mindset, that viral content has plagued us with is that we're not patient enough with the process. I mean, how long, I mean, this content
Oh,
process, right? Like, how long are you talking? I think you said years. So, like,
years.
yeah. So, like, and it doesn't end, but like from when you shifted from PR to content and then you started putting in that sort of work,
Yep.
and what, and there's different stages, like when you said you changed your writing level and stuff. Um, what's that timeline like for you in that experience? What was the timeline like?
Well, for me, it's probably longer than it had to be. One, because I was sort of new to that world. It took me a while being like so niche and being so B2B. It took some time to really learn and develop content for
Yeah,
that audience. The other thing is I didn't have a budget. You can um, you can accelerate your content adoption quickly with paid media.
yeah,
Um, and the sort of the other major fork to this conversation is building a database and
hmm,
being able to use a tool like a marketing automation platform to consistently poke that database, to slice them up into segments and know that like I know that these people are interested in this and I can send them this type of content. These people, however, need a different maybe over here you have like a manager level person, over here you have executive level people, and in general, regardless of industry, those are two different conversations that are generally going to happen. So paid media can accelerate it rapidly. That being said, and sorry, marketing automation can accelerate it rapidly. That being said, um, they're not an excuse for getting away from like the basics that you have to follow,
yeah,
which are good readable content. Follow your SEO practices. Use lots of images. Like the lots of like these are the things that content 101. You can't get away from that. You might have a $10,000 a month budget to promote your webinars, but if your like landing page experience stinks, it's not gonna make that big a difference. You're gonna just waste money. If your content's not good, if you don't have like if you have like a gigantic form that no one's gonna want to fill out to get to your webinar, then yeah, it doesn't matter. Like just you may as well be lighting your money on fire. So you can speed it up, but you can't get away from those like basic principles of what makes for good content and makes for a good experience.
yeah, absolutely. Yeah, because otherwise it's not sustainable. Yeah, it's like you have to
Oh,
put them together, or else like without the foundation, it'll just crumble pretty
yeah,
quickly. Yeah,
and you will waste chances with your audience.
yeah.
Um,
Well, that's where the trust is built, right? So, I mean, you can lose trust through stuff like automation and paid media crazy fast
Very
if you
quickly.
don't use it right. Yeah.
Yes, very
Um,
quickly.
okay, let's jump into like the automation side a little bit, since that's where you've lived a little bit more, and we're running a little bit low on time, and I want to be respectful of it. So, as you transitioned into automation, what was like something that really stood out as like, I don't like the term game changing, but what was like a really impressive shift in your either content or delivery that had like a significant impact on the business?
One for me was I suddenly had the ability to reach out to my entire database in a minute. Uh, Literally 300,000 people. This database that we had built for years, I had been having people subscribe and they just like sat in a WordPress plugin and they got automated like blog follow-ups. We're
Yeah,
talking like 2014,
yeah,
13
yeah,
here.
yep,
Um, and then we had a bunch of them in Salesforce, which we also didn't have the ability to do like mass emails out of Salesforce. Literally, I would go into Salesforce and log in as my sales reps and distribute content from them to their prospects one at a time. So, yeah, like to all of a sudden be handed HubSpot, it's like going from a pellet gun to a tank.
yeah,
Um, Quick access to people, and then the other big thing is like, all right, now I immediately started to get data. I can see what they can consume. I can see what pages they're viewing. I can see like how many pages they're viewing. I can follow their path once they come onto my website. I can see like, all right, they're going from this post to this post, and they're going to my homepage, pricing page, and I like suddenly that changes the content that I made. More than anything, it changes like the calls to action that I would have in a blog post. Uh, and then now all of a sudden I have a replicable path that I can guide people on instead of like sending them a blog post and keeping my fingers crossed that maybe they make their way back to my website. I can instead be like, okay, I want you to read this, and I'm going to put a call to action on that blog that takes them to like a conversion piece. They convert on that. Now I'm going to reach out to them with like a not so salesy message about my company, but maybe like a case study or something that comes from someone that looks like them. They consume that, and now I'm going to like hand them over to my sales team, or I'm just going to automate that outreach myself and be like, come sign up for a demo.
yeah,
Instead of keeping my fingers crossed that someone's going to follow that path, I can push them there, not or push. I can gently nudge them there,
yep.
and if they don't take the next step, then I can continue like pulling on them until they take that next step. It's, I mean, like from a pure distribution and customer journey standpoint, it's night and day different than what we had, 8 years ago.
For context, how long was your sales cycle in that
At
in that
this particular
environment?
company, it was about 6 months,
Yeah.
so it took a while. Um, but like with most companies, the big thing that we needed was to basically hand over like hot prospects to sales, warm people up, and just give sales like a warm body to start with.
Mm-hmm.
And then over time, we figured out like how can we accelerate that buying cycle using again the same set of tools, the same like content, the same marketing automation. Like how can we cut this down?
Yeah. Um, and what like immediate impacts, like how did you measure your success? And especially early on, like early adoption, typically with anything, measuring success is a process. So like
Yeah,
what do you feel like what was the impact on the business?
it took a few years to figure it out, but right off the bat, we were able to come back and say, uh, these numbers are made up, but
Sure.
basically of $50 million of business that we closed this year, marketing touched three-quarters of that.
Yeah.
And we were able to put in like the most basic attribution. Basically, like marketing had first touch for this amount. And then marketing had last touch on this amount. Back then, HubSpot had like basic reporting. We couldn't afford to go out and get something like Visible or some of those, high-powered tools. So, but for the first time, we had insight, and we had not. Well, I can't remember the word I'm looking for, but we had like concrete evidence, not anecdotal. That's the word. We
Yeah.
didn't have like we had more than just anecdotal evidence that marketing had impacted this. And as a result, like I was able to go back and ask for a slightly bigger budget and be able to like dump in some paid media to help promote this stuff.
Hmm.
But right off the bat, we were able to figure out like, all right, we have a role. We're not sure how big. We have a role though in this business that closed. And then by the
Cool.
time we were done, by the time like I left, we had it pretty well down to a science. Like, all right, everything from like time that it takes to get someone from a subscriber to an MQL to close, uh, even all the way down to like, as you move in more into that like operations role, we were then working on time, like our SLAs between sales and marketing. Like, all right, we know how long it takes from a lead to come into marketing for sales to make that first touch.
Yeah.
And we know how that impacts ultimately closes, which, that's invaluable. And it's the kind of thing that like we've only started to really get, that's become accessible to any marketer over the last, like what, 3-4 years.
Yep. Cool. Yeah, that's awesome. We don't have time for it, but I think one thing I'd love to go back and forth on you with is multi-touch attribution. Because I'm actually really skeptical of it.
Yes.
And I'm on a small team, so maybe we'll have some other conversation or offline or something. But I want to go back and forth with you on that because I have a lot of skepticism on it.
For good
Okay.
reason.
Yeah, good. Yeah. Okay. I'm glad that at least there's some validity to my
Yes.
thinking. Awesome. I think there's a lot of good lessons here. Appreciate the time.
Always.
And looking forward to, if you guys throw on some additional virtual events or whatever for HubSpot user groups, and appreciate it, man.
Everyone can sign up. Just search for Salt Lake City HubSpot user group. Where thanks to like COVID, anyone that sees this can join, regardless of where you are. So yeah, please, we'd love to have you. We talk about not just HubSpot, we talk about all the marketing, all the marketing nerdery. So come geek it up with us.
Yeah, absolutely. Join. I've been to several of the events and they're really good. There's good stuff in there. So again, thanks, dude. We'll
Thank you.
We'll chat soon.